morning.
Good morning.
Please rise. I'm going to ask Regent Otterkirk to give us a brief moment of reflection. I'm sorry, Regent Atkinson. She's nodding yes.
Start over again, please.
She knew I meant Regent Atkinson.
I know.
Because I'm looking at her.
It's okay.
Okay, Regent Atkinson.
That's it. I hesitate to follow Regent Outerkirk from yesterday because I have spent all day thinking about her imagery. But I am taken today by how quickly the things that we decide in this room go out of this room. And I think that as we think about the future and the positive things that we can do, we think about the positive and not the negative.
Thank you. At this time, for a brief statement, I'm going to turn it over to Regent Young.
It's worth recognizing. Some of you may remember where you were 46 years ago today on April 4th. And you may recall on April 4th, 1968, that was the day that Martin Luther King was murdered. And so today is the anniversary of that day. And I thought it would just be appropriate, given what he meant to this country, that we just have a moment of silence in commemoration of what happened.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have our full board consent items. The charter applications for April 2017, the supplemental charter applications, the summary of the March 2017 meeting of the Board of Regents, our Regents monthly meeting dates January through December 2018 are in your packet. Do I have a motion to approve these consent items? Thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Now we have our consent items by program area, and we will start with John Degotti, Higher Education.
Thank you, Chancellor. We have amendments to the regs regarding the reissuance of expired certificates and time that is required for supplemental certificates.
Thank you, John. Next, we have Joan Ebert with our P12.
We're asking for the recognition of the accredited programs for the Council of Islamic Schools in North America and the New York Association of Christian Schools.
Thank you. Next, we have Doug Lentovich with Professional Practice.
Thank you, Chancellor. We ask for approval of the following items. 6 reappointments to the State Boards from Professions, 2 licensing petitions, 11 requests for the conferral of the MD degree, and 3 permissions to operate, or 2 permissions to operate, one for the Midwifery Institute of Philadelphia University, and one for the University of Pennsylvania Nurse Practitioner and Clinical Nurse Specialist programs, and a master plan amendment for Truro College to offer a Bachelor of Science in Nursing.
Thank you, Doug. Do I have a motion to accept the program area consent items? Regent Cottrell? A second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We have our committee reports for approval: adult career, continuing ed services, access, adult budget and finance, cultural education, higher ed, P12, professional practice. Do I have a motion for approval? Second, Regent Chin. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now we have Beth Berlin with our State Education Department March 2017 fiscal report.
Thank you, Chancellor. This is the final report of the fiscal year. All accounts remain in structural balance. The cultural education account is operating within their approved plan, and the negative balance did not grow this year.
Thank you, Beth. Do I have a motion for approval?
Motion.
Regent Finn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Regent Otterkirk had her hand up first. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. At this time, Commissioner, we have the designation of Professional Conduct Officer for consideration. Do I have, okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
So education law, section 6505, parens 8, requires the Board of Regents to designate a professional conduct officer. Currently, that position is held by Louis Catone. However, he is retiring from state service, so we are bringing to you the approval of Doug Lentovich as the professional conduct officer.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion for approval? And I'm looking all the way down.
I so move.
Second? Thank you. We have a second. So all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And I think we are now going to move into our ESSA conversation. So we stand adjourned from the first part, and we move immediately into our ESSA conversation.
Not immediately. 2 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner?
Thank you. So the first part of this presentation, and I want to just briefly go through kind of an update on where we are, the work that's been done. A number of you participated in a workshop that we had at Mercy College. We appreciate that. Some of you were unable to make it to that, but we want to make sure that those of you who were not have an overview of where we are. So the summary of that work done at that March retreat, we'll be sharing feedback from the work group discussions and review where we are in terms of the goals we set out to establish at the March and April discussions on ESSA. So our first slide, the summary of the March ESSA retreat, the whole group discussion. You go to the next slide, please. There we are. Thank you. At the March ESSA retreat, Chancellor Rosa set the context for the meeting by articulating a mission statement that can guide the Regents as they make decisions about New York's ESSA plan. This is all in the packet in front of you. At the March meeting, Linda Darling Hammond and Scott Marion facilitated a discussion and a set of activities focused on a vision for education in New York and an accompanying theory of action, the concept of tiers of indicators and which indicators should be used to differentiate among schools, the relative importance of indicators used for accountability, the ways in which the results from indicators are used to categorize schools, and the relationship between the reporting of indicators and how accountability decisions are made. During the day, the Regents had numerous opportunities to interact with our national experts, reflect individually on the questions, and to partner with other Regents in discussion. In the afternoon, there were 3 group discussions. The first was on supporting excellent educators. I think there's some key points here. Each school system, district, is required to report any disproportionality in the rates at which minority and low-income students in Title I schools are assigned to ineffective, out-of-field, and inexperienced teachers. Each school district is required under ESSA to publicly report on its progress in closing the equity gaps. And the educator equity provisions of ESSA have largely been carried over from prior authorizations of ESEA, No Child Left Behind, and the USDE most recently approved NICED's plan to ensure equitable access to the most effective educators in September of 2015. During the March ESSA retreat, board members discussed the definitions currently used by the department for minority and low-income students and ineffective, out-of-field, inexperienced teachers, and explored whether changes to those current definitions were needed. Board members agreed that we should maintain current definitions of the following terms. For minority students, that is, students who are identified as American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander, and multiracial. Equity gap analysis conducted related to race ethnicity will compare the access of Black or African American and Hispanic or Latino and Asian students to that of white students. Low-income students would be defined as students who participate in or whose family participates in economic assistance programs such as free reduced lunch programs, Social Security Insurance or SSI, food stamps, foster care, refugee assistance, in either cash or medical assistance, earned income tax credit, home energy assistance, safety net assistance, Bureau of Indian Affairs, or family assistance, temporary assistance for needy families. So all of those would be included in that definition. Out-of-field teachers would be teachers who do not hold a certification in a content area for all the courses that they teach, and teachers with approved extensions are not counted as out-of-field. Board members agreed that the department should explore a change in the definition of inexperienced teachers. Our current equity plan defines inexperienced teachers as first-year teachers, but consistent with the research that indicates that teachers develop and increase their effectiveness most during the first 3 to 5 years of their career, the department will explore changing this definition to teachers with 3 or fewer years of experience. And after discussion of the definitions of key terms, we explored possible ways in which the department could provide support to the LEAs to help close the gaps of equitable access. The next section is comprehensive support and improvement under ESSA. Based on this discussion, the NICED staff will ensure that each of the 4 areas identified drives the need assessment process. Department staff envision the diagnostic needs assessment will consist of a review of school quality using the diagnostic tool for school district effectiveness, the DTSDE rubric, along with the resource audit that examines, I don't know, right. But you know educators, we put those letters together and want to make it a sound. That examines school level data to see if inequities exist. Of the 4 areas identified by the Regents as needing significant attention, curriculum and leadership are currently evaluated through our effectiveness tool. The use of time and professional development could be considered resources, and thus SED staff can assure that both play a prominent role in the resource audit that schools will be doing under the new ESSA. The Regents recommended that the NICED structure school improvement grants and other funding opportunities for these schools in ways that incentivize them to address the 4 areas, as well as other critical areas identified by the needs assessment. In other words, funding would be preconditioned on schools demonstrating robust plans to address the 4 areas based on the results of the school needs assessment. NICED was also urged to partner with turnaround organizations, districts, and regional technical assistance centers to both identify other potential areas of critical needs as well as mechanisms for providing support for these schools to address the needs. Regent Young and Regent Odekirk were provided with a summary of the meeting and follow-up questions based on the conversation. They'll be providing additional feedback to the staff. Under the other topic that we had on innovative assessment, the demonstration authority, the group discussion focused on the benefits of participation in the pilot, strategies for scaling up, which is a requirement, funding for the pilot, and seeking partners to support the pilot. In deciding whether the benefits are sufficient to warrant participation, we must consider whether it is crucial to consider the problem and whether the innovative assessment is a solution. So Scott Marion noted that this innovation assessment project will require a significant investment of time and resources, and it should not be seen as an easy way to get around the assessment requirements. Scott also recommended starting with a small change, single assessment in a single grade, and making sure participating LEAs are demographically representative of the entire state. And the discussion summary, the main benefit of participating in the innovative project is that it will provide flexibility to address specific issues in our education and assessment systems. The innovative assessment may start as a pilot, but must be scaled statewide to replace current state assessments by the end of a 5 to 7 year demonstration period. And no additional funding is provided for any of the states participating in that. But we should begin as soon as possible potential partners and working with them to identify our interest. Okay. So the last two slides really get to the goals that were established as we started the March retreat. And we've had the opportunity for some in-depth discussions. So I just want to give you an update or an estimation of where I think we are with those goals. The first one, the Chancellor Rosa presented a mission statement for the Board of Regents that aligns with the direction and priorities of our ESSA work. The Regents, on the second one, I think you would all agree that as a board, we now have a detailed understanding of ESSA and the requirements. And we went over the fact that, and Scott and Linda also contributed to the fact that what we thought was going to be part of it was taken off the page by the current administration, and so we now are dealing just with the requirements of the law, not any of the other regulations and or rules that were sent out. On the feedback on the department's recommendations, the discussion on these areas is underway, and I believe that we have a good indication of where the board stands on many areas, but we have continued discussion coming. On the general agreement to provide staff with direction on the measures of school quality, we did talk about that and how we would have the, what direction we should take in that. One of the main themes, and the next one on Tier 2 indicators, one of the main themes to come out of the March retreat was the idea that the Board of Regents are extremely interested in the idea of Tier 2 indicators as a way to help schools improve. The discussion was continued, and you'll see the elements of the discussion incorporated into the draft plan to be presented as we move forward. I think it's important to understand, we made it very clear, some of the Tier 2 indicators we are not in a position to put into Tier 1 because we don't have right now the capacity to collect that data, but if that's the indication that we have to go that direction, then we have to work to make sure that we can get there. On the weighting of indicators, you'll have an opportunity to provide that direction during the course of our meetings, and today you will see actually designs that have been developed by Scott Marion on ways that you could use those indicators. I think it's Scott, it could be Linda, they work together on that. And then also on providing direction on the methods for producing an overall determination, that is the differentiation of schools. You're going to see some of the ways that we can do that, so that that was part of our discussion, and we thought it was important to have actual models in front of you. On engaging in discussion in general guidance for staff on the overall classification of schools, We are required to say whether a school is in good standing, whether they should receive targeted support and improvement, or whether they should be in the category of comprehensive support and improvement schools. We've presented that. That may be part of the discussion today, and I'm sure it will continue. The issue was presented in your briefing regarding long-term goals and interim measures of progress in their use. And this issue, you were presented briefing materials that we will refer back to. We'll also provide you with more on the possible options, and we'll be highlighting those within the draft plan that you'll be presented with in May. And the identification of targeted and improvement schools was discussed. We're going to give you more information on the options. You'll see that. We'll highlight those options within a draft plan. So as we present the draft plan to you, it will be a draft plan for continued discussion with the Regents, but we'll also get continued discussion in our meetings across the state, where we will ask the public to give their information and their concerns. The March board meeting, as well as getting information from stakeholders, are interested in pursuing the pilot related to the innovative assessment demonstration, and we'll highlight the interest in that program within the draft application as we move forward. On recommendations pertaining to effective educators, this issue and support for that will be part of the options that will be outlined. And then regarding school improvement activities in that process, we'll provide feedback to staff on the school improvement activities and processes. These are issues that are still under discussion, and we're working with both Scott and Linda Darling-Hammond on those. I think the last two slides really get to public hearings. The department plans to have each of you participate in your area in public hearings. We'll be coming to you for approval of the draft application for public comment. During the public comment period, the department will host 13 regional ESSA public hearings during May and June, 5 in New York City and 8 in the rest of the state. The hearings will be open to the public. Persons can sign in at the meeting site for speaking opportunities and submit comments via email or snail mail. And the dates and general locations have been released. More details on the specific locations and times will be released shortly, and we'll make sure that coordinates with your understanding. I think it's important to know that individuals across the state, remember we have had close to 130 or more meetings that have been hosted by our district superintendents and the superintendents of each of our big 5. But this is an opportunity for us to get out and to hear specifically comments that come in on the draft plan once that gets released after your May meeting. And then the last slide is the state plan timeline. So May, you will receive a draft plan. All of the things that we've been doing, the meetings we've presented at, the work that we're doing with Linda Darling-Hammond and Scott, and conversations that we have today with them as we move through this will be included in that. We'll release, after you see it in May, we want to, at that point, release the draft plan for public comment, knowing that there will be continued changes. In July of 2017, at the Board of Regents meeting, the staff will present the changes to the draft plan based on public comment and your continued comments, and request permission to send the revised draft plan to the governor. The governor has 30 days to review that and to provide approval. The September 2017 Board of Regents meeting is very important. The staff at that time will seek approval to submit the final plan to USDE because the submittal date required is September 18th. So we have it mapped out. We have, I think, had some excellent meetings to get feedback from the Regents, and we'll continue to take the conversations that we have with you and public conversations back so that we can make that draft plan as appropriate as possible, and then we'll move forward to get comments from across the state in our public hearings. So thank you very much. We're ready to go into the next section. Yes. Regent Young?
Yeah, this is just a question, and I know when Regent Odekirk and I were in the group with Ira, I mean, we found it useful. They were able to generate some questions, and I guess what I'm asking is, this is a major undertaking, and there are probably points within the application where there's general consensus, and then there are points in the application where there may be some contention. Is it possible to have those highlighted so that we maintain focus? So that, in other words, every time we meet, we're not going over the same thing. So I'm just offering that as a suggestion that there, you know, if we could identify where are the points where we haven't reached any consensus, if we could identify them.
I think as we move through the day today with Linda and Scott, their focus has been on the things that we felt the Regents needed to have continued conversation on. So I think we've done that to an extent. If there's other things that come up, we certainly can provide those questions and get feedback from the Regents. Because of the time that we lost due to weather, we are on a pretty tight timeline. But I agree with you, Regent, and we've got to have those questions flushed out.
All right. So just so everyone, because we separated into different groups, and so for example, there was a question that was posed to our group regarding what should be the requirements in case you have to replace the principal. And so I'm assuming that there's going to be a point. Regent Odekirk and I will make a recommendation, but is there a point at which time we have a sense of how folks feel about that, or you see what I'm getting at?
Yes.
See, so these are major. I think that's a major issue. That's just one. There are perhaps 10 others.
I'm sure there will be others.
Yeah.
Right. And so as we go through, we'll have to work with the chancellor to figure out the ways to get the feedback on some of those issues that continue as part of the discussion. You're right. I mean, that is just one. And we had others that when that discussion occurred, we didn't get it back to the whole group, so that the whole group did it. And the whole group did not really, was not constituted of the whole group. So I think it's important for us to have those conversations. It's a good point.
We didn't even finish in some of the groups.
Yes.
Regent Odekirk?
Yes, I would just make a quick comment, and that is one of the things that I said that day in our small, very small committee, was that communication of identification of districts needs a lot of attention. We should learn from our past experience, and I'd like to see that built on a more positive foundation than it has been to this point.
And of course, I also want to point out that a lot of these topics also we've gotten much feedback from the think tank group, which is made up of people from across the state in districts and other organizations, but also from individuals who have given us feedback when they had the public meetings out in the public. So the point is not lost that we have some issues that I think need to come to the board for clear conversation on those.
Yeah, I think if
We gotta figure it out.
I think the two components here, if we can triangulate all the different pieces that we have received in terms of feedback, think tank, the small group, the large group, all the various conversations, and if we can create a kind of a roadmap of saying this is an area that has 90% agreement. Okay, so we can push that aside. This particular area around, let's say for argument's sake, as you said, leadership still has a lot of work. Identification, even the pilot, what are the kinds of pieces that we're focused on in terms of the pilot? And we can sort of, even if we have it on 3, high, low, medium, where we've got high agreement, kind of the middle of the road agreement, and we still have a lot of work to do, then we can zoom in on the areas that we still have to.
I expect there will be patterns when you go through.
Correct, right,
Or we go through, whoever.
right.
So we will have time to collect information at the next meeting, which will be adjacent to the May meeting, to be able to make some changes in the draft plan before it goes out. So that will address, I think, some of it.
Regent Young?
I don't want to appear that I'm not understanding it. Allow me to use another example. There was a lot of discussion at the retreat. Several of my colleagues weren't there, but there was discussion around the identification of schools and do we rate schools and provide a dashboard, or do we do this or do we do that? And I guess my question is, at what point is that decision made? Because I know we had a lot of discussion.
We did.
And I just don't know where the discussion ended. I mean, I know what my preference is, but I don't know what we've decided.
So part of our discussion today will be Linda, Darling Hammond, and Scott Marion, who will be addressing some of the things that were already brought up in there, so we can flush out from more of the regions
Right. And
what the comments were.
I'm sorry, keeping in mind that for the regions that were not at the meeting, that the bulk of the work was around tier 1. And I think that was stated earlier by the commission. So when we broke into our groups, we were really looking at these categories, but with a focus on the tier 1 items, not the 2 and the 3. Although some of the 2s, there was a lot of interest, we sort of said, you know what, let's bring it back to the tier 1 items.
So the next part of this, Angelica, you remember you indicated to us that you would like a diversity policy brought to the regions. We want to make sure that this is part of the discussion as we move forward. We're suggesting and have taken the concepts that have come up in our discussions, including that work group, the work time that we had, the workshop. So if you have a packet that says promoting diversity integration in New York State, so if we can just quickly go through that, and that will be a basis for some of the conversations around ESSA as well.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So at last Monday's meeting, there was a lot of conversation about diversity and the importance of really seeing it being prevalent in the ESSA plan. So we were very excited about that because we've been thinking about this and we've been doing some work around it, and we will be ready very shortly to present something to you. But I want to go over today some of the information that we have thus far for you. As you know, many of you know that there was a study done in 2014 by UCLA, and it was a very devastating study. If you recall, it named New York State school system as the most segregated school system in the nation. I think that we were all appalled by that and felt the need to start thinking about what we're going to do moving forward. So if you look on this slide, even though we're the most racially diverse and socioeconomically diverse state in the nation, we have this existing situation in our school system. So ESSA is a prime place for us to really look at how we change that in our state. So if we look at the average of white students attending a school, the 80% of their peers are white and only 30% of their peers are low income, right? So over half of Black and Latino students attend schools where less than 10% of their peers are white, and the average Black and Latino students attended schools where 70% of their peers were low income. So the information is startling. I don't think it's new to any of us, right? I think we know and we see in our school system. But then what we're talking about is how do we change this paradigm, and how do we use ESSA as a vehicle to move forward? So one of the most interesting facts is that our system, since 1989 to 2010, there has actually been an increase in the segregation that has existed in our system. So while research shows that segregated schools correlates with low academic achievement for students of color and low-income students, there's a strong growing body of research that demonstrates positive holistic outcomes for all students. So for example, racial and socioeconomic integration, the benefits are very clear. We know some of them, and we have some listed here. Leads to higher academic outcome for students of color and low-income students. Closes the achievement gap between students of different racial and economic backgrounds. Fosters critical thinking and ability to communicate and work with people of all backgrounds. Reduces racial and ethnic prejudice while increasing cross-cultural trust and relationships. And some that might even surprise you. Decreases the likelihood of teenage pregnancy, believe it or not, that's part of the study. And decreases the interaction with juvenile justice system, all things that we have been discussing in the board. And increase the likelihood of college going and success. So we know this, right? So how are we going to tackle it? I think the board has been very clear with us about the need to really look at this area in our work. Aside from a strong body of research demonstrated positive outcome for all students, integration is also a strategy that will be in alignment with what we've already come forth as part of our vision for the state of New York with My Brother's Keeper's work. If you think about My Brother's Keeper, and we talk about entering school ready to learn, read at grade level by 3rd grade, graduate from high school ready for college and careers, complete secondary education or training, successfully enter the workforce, and grow up in safe communities and get a second chance if a mistake is made. Those are things that we've said we value, right, as a board. So our job now is to find a way to integrate it, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about that. We've created a policy statement that we hope to bring to you shortly. So the policy statement is very clear for us to create a vision for the state of New York. And in that vision, it's a draft that we're going to bring forward. That vision defines diversity and provides a framework for districts to develop integration plans. We can't just talk about it, we have to actually create plans to move in a different direction. So part of that policy statement is also to explain integration, not only about getting diverse students into the same schools, but also thinking about culturally relevant pedagogy that we discuss all the time here, but also the diverse school staff to ensure that students get the full benefit of integration. Finally, the statement, we identify a few districts that are actually doing this work as we speak, to highlight their work and to be able to point to success and give other districts ideas as well as a place to start from. So that work is currently taking place. The state policy to promote integration in ESSA, we've developed 2 high concept ideas. I don't know if anyone's had the opportunity to look at them, but we gave them last Monday at our meeting. And the high concept idea, SED should measure integration in schools and consider ways to incorporate this measure into the accountability system. And then the other one is integration as an evidence-based intervention. As part of ESSA, we are to use evidence-based interventions, and this qualifies as one. So this is what we're proposing at this time, and we will have that statement ready. And we're really excited about the possibility and what we can do.
Okay, the first one is Regent Collins, then I have Regent Young, Regent Tillis.
Yeah.
Not yet? Okay, I just want to make sure I get it. I am looking in your direction.
It's got to percolate.
Get it right. Okay, Regent Collins.
Thank you. I'm interested in how we arrange the document, and maybe this is something that I should be waiting to ask Linda and who's working on this because I'm concerned as to how we roll it out in the communities and what comes first and how you select what comes first when we're making those presentations. And I did ask at one of our meetings, we've had so many on ESSA, that there be some type of a summary document for our parents and for lay people in our community, because this is so intimidating when we're talking about this much information, but we want people to support what we do and the work that the staff has done and the Regents have done. So those are just a couple of things that we should keep in mind when we're looking at the importance of the document. Also, this piece that was so nicely presented, Ms. Green, that we make sure that that's really significant and it sticks out in the report.
And Joan and her staff have been working on ways that we can do something that is an outline of the plan, because as you said, this is a very extensive plan. We wouldn't want that to be the only thing that people in the community see, but it has to be done in a way that incorporates the key points of that. So we're working on that.
And I think Regent Collins has emphasized the issue that in a very simplistic language so that it can be consumed and understood, and that's always the challenge.
We need our parents' support on this. We need them to be out there, not only just the Regents, but, supporting the work that we've done.
Absolutely.
But we really need theirs.
And Regent Finn made the point that in other languages so that people can. Regent Young?
I would only ask that as the staff goes forward, you consider just a couple of points. The research on integration is not just about osmosis. It's not just about children sitting next to each other. It is about what are the benefits of an integrated. In other words, what occurs in an integrated setting that doesn't occur in a segregated setting. And I think that would be very informative. The second point that I would make is I guess it's the slide 3 or slide 2, talks about racial and socioeconomic integration, and the assumption, at least when you read this, is that these two things are the same, and they're not.
No.
But I think in talking about them in that way, it gives the impression. I mean, my recommendation is that you would separate socioeconomic,
Yes,
because what
separate.
happens,
That's right.
it's not
Yep.
just socioeconomic segregation, it's isolation. And what we see happening in many districts is that many youngsters, they're the same racial and ethnic group, but they're all poor. They don't, the reality is that many black students don't get to go to schools with other black students that are doing well. And so there's an isolation that occurs in many well-meaning districts. And I think, it would benefit us if we just made the distinction between those two. Right.
Thank you. Regent Hillis?
Yeah, I'm not sure what we're supposed to put in this plan, whether we want a wish list of things that can be done or things that can be done under existing law. And I bring that up because if New York is the worst in the country, segregation, Long Island is worse than New York, my area. And virtually, there have been study after study after study done as to how much the segregation is, why it has happened through land use and deliberate working. But a lot of that can't be changed without some real changes in the law. But there are things that we can recommend that I think can be helpful, such as regional schools, shared services of different kinds. And I don't, a district's segregation within the district is very different than segregation from district to district, and I don't know where we're supposed to be coming out, but I would hope that we would look at district to district segregation in the context of what can be done and what probably can't be done.
Great point, thank you. I do think that as we look at the plan, obviously the plan right now is a framework. And as we look at the plan, and as you said, what are the things that we can advance based on the realities of communities? I think a great deal of this is going to be creating opportunities for people to share some of these issues and name them and identify it, because a lot of times we don't even do what you just did, which is make a statement that while
We've had lots
while
of
the
studies
state,
on it. Yeah.
well, but a lot of times you have a study, and there are people that'll do a counter study, or even if they do that study, it sits in the shelf someplace. Sometimes you have to almost keep saying it, and then put in place even some small goals and objectives to try to begin the conversations. So thank you for that. Next is Regent Johnson, and then Regent Cashin, and then Regent Reyes.
Thank you for putting this together. Really very good start, and it's not surprising to any one of us, but I have a couple of suggestions. It's a very important goal, but it's going to be challenged by many people in many places who find this threatening. For all the emotional reasons that you can imagine, this is a threatening idea. And one of the counties that I represent is probably as segregated as the counties out on the island. So I'm wondering whether we can do this by ourselves, or whether we need to really begin to bring to the table other state agencies that work around the areas of health and housing and economic development. And I'm going to take it a step further. And I know we tried this in the 60s, but we may have to try it again. Maybe we need to fund a project with an area that we can talk to that's willing to give this a try, and let them show us how this works, because I don't think we can do this by ourselves. You mentioned a number of prominent researchers. I won't point out the name yet, but one of them has agreed to meet with us, the Board of Regents. I'm working on that with the Chancellor to see if we can bring her in for May. She's going to share with us, if she comes, and we can find the time, the successes and challenges that are faced in this arena all over the country. So the last thing I want to say is that there's an education that needs to be done for the entire nation. We're not all of one mind when it comes to the value of integration or the value of diversity. And I have no great ideas about how we get people all of one mind, but I think we're going to need the press, we're going to need television, public service announcements, we're going to need anyone out there who's respected by the public to help us educate the American public. We are a diverse country. We need to promote it in our own neighborhoods. But I would definitely say that if we can't try to do this by ourselves, so we're going to have to bring state agencies to the table.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. Next, Regent Cashin, then Regent Reyes, and Regent Finn, and then we're going to move on to our next topic.
Well, you know, the data on integration is significant for both sides of the coin. And so I think we need to put teeth in this somewhere by saying any new programs, any new schools have to be integrated. We did that in my district like many years ago when I was a principal. We even went a step further, and the school board was able to engender having northern end of the district students come to schools that were mostly white or et cetera. So that would be a lot of discussion, but any new program, any new school, I think we need to start putting teeth in this. Because we're talking about the importance, not just for the minority child, but for the white child as well. And requirement in the program, specificity in the program, this is the goal, or you don't get the program. I mean, I remember being a principal where they had a center for intellectually gifted in District 22, and Superintendent Coma said, if you want this program, you have to make sure there is extensive diversity. And we did. And all the principals did, all over the district, whether you're in a minority school or a middle of the road school, which was mine, which was a mixed, or the southern end, which was mostly white. So ways that we can really put teeth in this, because that data on New York State, we really have to put some real strong strategies in place. And the children after Brown versus the Board of Education did benefit from integration greatly. And then somehow it was, watered down, where the requirement for integration wasn't there anymore. So I do think that our proposal should have specific strategies or requirements.
Regent, I have Regent Reyes, Finn, and Vice Chancellor, you will have the last word.
I just wanted to go back to the original classification relating to segregation and the issue of gifted and talented, meaning where gifted and talented programs are available, not available, and where students may be in restrictive special ed environments. The issues of the both ends, if you might, in some people's minds of the continuum, and to what extent there's a segregation going on. It may be in one particular district, in a large school district like New York City, or in some other districts. It may be by schools, and so I think that's important. The other point is how tests and funds, or the lack of funds, drive segregation, to the extent that we've been involved in a 24-year lawsuit relating to the constitutional right to sound basic education, and whether or not we've gotten there. And so I really feel that resource accountability, if children, poor children, special ed children, any other children generate money, but the money doesn't get used for what they're generated, I think our plan has to include some way of making recommendations to the legislature about connecting the funds that we do get to ensuring that the funds get to where they're needed, because oftentimes the lack of that, the lack of adequacy and the lack of equity drives segregation.
Okay. Thank you, Regent Reyes. Regent Finn?
So here's the deal. I listen to all the comments and they all come back to one thing for me. You can put people in the same building and have two different schools running. I've seen it. Higher IEPs for the minority children, less access to the advanced courses, more discipline, everything that we've talked about. Two separate schools running in the same building. So you can talk about integration. I don't even like the word, because what it conjures up in my mind, that these, it's kind of like this sleight of hand. We put them in the same building, they're integrated. No, they're not. And the problem is, really, You can't legislate morality. Okay? People don't want their children in the building with us. So until we address that, the fears, I don't know how we do this. We've got to figure out a way to make people understand that your children are not going to die going to school with black and brown children. And maybe there are even some benefits with going to school with us. We all know it's true. Don't sit here looking at me. We know it's true. So let's address that and figure out when we do this, how to make sure that there's some educational component to this. And if we can really get people to talk about this, because the problem in this country is people just hate talking about race. It makes them uncomfortable. We have that legacy, and we just keep kicking the can down the road. We've got to get beyond that. We've got to get to a point where we actually say, you know, let's just talk about how you really feel. I can take it, as long as you can take what I'm getting ready to tell you back. And let's do it. It's got to be a part of this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Finn. Oh boy. Okay. No, I'm, it's just that we're trying to, so can we, Vice Chancellor, I want you to be the closer, so I'm gonna let Regent Otterkirk and Regent Chin just make a brief statement, okay?
I just want to piggyback on what Josephine just said and add another concern to it. I suspect we will see population shifts if we start to implement this, and that is related to what she's talking about. I don't have the answers, but we have many concerns in trying to implement this.
What triggered it for me, Regent Finn, is the fact is that then how do we hold schools accountable for integration? It's much bigger than all of us. So how do we then hold an individual school accountable for that particular measure?
I think everything that's been said I agree largely with. And Regent Cashin, I thought, presented a very weighty point in putting teeth into any measure that we take. The problem that I see, though, is right now, the way the laws are written, we don't have the ability to mandate certain districts to integrate.
Correct.
And that requires act of laws as opposed to regulations, which we own in this building. If you look at some of the most segregated districts in this state, they don't have enough varied demographic to integrate.
That's right.
And if you look at some of those districts, you can move students around, but you're talking about moving students of color, largely poor, around to other schools that are made up of students of color, largely poor. And if you do that, you're moving students around, but you're really not achieving meaningful integration. And also, not only on the racial front, but with respect to socioeconomics. If they're all poor, you're not getting that benefit either, which you could get if you had poor students of color and wealthy students of color living within the same districts.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you look at some of those most integrated school districts, it may well be that within minutes away there are high-performing school districts, but they're in different school districts. They're in different towns.
Yes.
And I know I gave a speech not long ago, and one of the things I emphasized was, for instance, in the city of Rochester, some of the most underperforming schools in the state are in Rochester. Within 10 minutes of every one of those underperforming school districts is a high-performing school district. That's the reality, but they're in different towns.
That's right.
And none of those school districts in those different towns have any obligation to take any of those other students. And those that do have programs in place, one is called urban suburban, they have the ability to choose. So they're taking the higher performing students. which raises questions about that, which we won't get into.
Well,
But
yeah.
those are just some of the
Yeah.
some of the issues that really highlight the need to make this a bigger discussion and engagement requirement for those across the street
Yeah.
as well as here.
I would say this document as a framework is going to get us to at least have some of these courageous, honest conversations and begin to put in place some of the things that we have experienced. Because as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of the young man when we were in Brooklyn at Medgar Evers who said, we thought that when we would create a high-performing school, that other students would come to our school, and we've yet to have any white students come up to our school. And it was a high-performing school. So, a very high-performing school. So that was very telling at that moment. The other part of it is that for those sitting around this table, I had Throats Neck, Soundview, and Hunts Point. Throats Neck, looking one way. I was trilingual economically and ethnic and racially. It was a district that was very diverse. You visited 101. Middle school that had Throats Neck, primarily white students, Soundview, primarily African American, and Hunts Point, primarily Latino students. I started a middle school and we integrated it. I had to put it in Throats Neck and then bring my other students. At the point that the community embraced the fact that it wasn't about the kids, it's about the adults. The kids had no issues. They built the strongest relationships that I have ever seen in a class. As a matter of fact, some of those students have gone back to teach in that school, and others have gone on to some of the best colleges in this and have come back to give back to the community. And I know Regent Cashin visited the school, and it was a fully diverse. It was like almost one third, and very high performing. But again, I was a superintendent, and I was committed to that. And unless you as an individual are committed and have the power and also the desire and the will to make it happen, and those are in isolation. These are small pockets of possibilities. It's going to be very, very difficult.
I think in discussion with the Vice Chancellor. Yeah, I guess we can legislate. I think that was one of the points, integration. But if the training and the focus of the principals is on diversity and teaching respect, and if you make the goals start to permeate our schools, the goal of integration, the goal of having, and all the staff as well. It worked in 22. We diversified the schools, and the principals protected and supported the kids, and it started to really work, where they hung out with each other. I'm just suggesting, and I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong, I'm suggesting the socio-emotional dimension of the superintendent backing this, and everybody knows it, and the principals know it, and the teachers know it, and the parents know that children will be safe. It worked, and I just think just having a gold pie in the sky without the terrain, we got to do something about the isolation that's being created by this. So that's why I suggested the term I used was teeth in it. It's not legislative teeth, but it's a policy of the superintendent, and it's a policy of, and it really, 22 was a remark, and we were one of the highest districts, most times, many times, highest in Brooklyn, and we have a lot of districts in Brooklyn. And maybe sometimes we had one district that beat us, but that was a very integrated district as well, District 18. but we were always up there with all the diversity, because this was a priority of the parents, the school board, the superintendent, and therefore the principals. And it took guts on the part of the superintendent and the school board, but we had such a wonderful outcome for the kids.
Just a point of correction, Regent Cashin, perhaps I wasn't clear earlier. I'm 100% in agreement with you on the concept. I'm just saying we have to put laws and other measures in place to be able to effectuate that. Because because to do what you're talking about, you have to have an integrated community to begin with. If you have a segregated community, there's no one to draw from, unless you go outside of the lines of that district or that municipality. And right now, the laws being what they are, we don't have the ability, or school districts don't have the ability to send someone outside of their district, unless the district they're sending them to are receptive.
Okay, we're going to continue. This is a powerful, amazing conversation, and we're going to continue this. But for the record, I do want to say that 101, the school that I was just talking about, was in the top 5. I mean, I think it made it as number 1 or 2 in the whole city of New York. So here it was, in the Bronx, District 8, and it actually outperformed many of the so-called higher district schools. So there's something to be said for that strength in that integration. Okay, we're going to move on. Let me just give you, and I really think this is, many of the great issues that have been raised are the kinds of continuing, we need to continue the conversation. We're going to move to the assessment system, but before we do, I just want to give the board a signal that at 1 o'clock, we are going to go live with, we're going to go live at 1 o'clock with Scott and Linda. So we have to be very mindful of the fact, sorry? There is no lunch, no free lunch today. No, I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding, Region Reyes. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Because we are running way behind schedule, we're going to try to spend about 10 minutes starting this conversation, and I know it's tight for you to get then to their conversation, so we may ask them to be delayed for a few minutes. And then if people can get their lunch, and I know we don't have a lot of room at this table, but if we can do a working lunch at the table, that will keep us moving, because I know this group, if we move out, by the time we move back in, it's not going to happen. Okay, so take it away.
Okay, Jennifer Dunn is with us today. She's an associate of Scott Marion. We appreciate you being here, Jennifer. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to go really, really fast through this. So I'm here today to talk to you about considerations to be making when, in the design of the new New York assessment. So we're switching gears a little bit away from the kind of state accountability and diversity over to assessment. Yeah. So the reason I'm here is that the Regents have directed SED staff and technical advisors to think through issues and opportunities associated with making changes. So today we're going to discuss a variety of trade-offs, and we're also going to discuss implications of when to make those changes and things to think through when you need to approach that. So just to start off, some common uses of assessments to give you an idea of the different types of things we try to do with our state assessment. So, and this is just some common examples from across a variety of states. So at the student level, a critical piece is obviously measuring student achievement. Another piece that has come out is measuring strengths and weaknesses of students, making individual student decisions. At the school level, we like to use these assessments for accountability purposes, teacher evaluation, program evaluation. At the district and state level, again, accountability, program evaluation, and also to make comparisons. So to make comparisons of how different districts are doing, different schools are doing, and different states are doing. So That's a lot. That's a pretty high demand on a single assessment. In addition to all that, we basically want an assessment that provides information that's useful for evaluating programs and interventions, provides information for improving student teaching and learning, provides high quality data for accountability, is administered the last week of school, can deliver results at least a month before school gets out, is inexpensive, takes zero time, and basically when it comes down to it, again, the demands on assessment are on one single assessment are pretty high. So when you're considering assessment design, you ultimately have to kind of pick one, or at best two, or maybe three. So a big important task here is to prioritize what are the elements that are important to you. So a little bit about what I've learned about New York and New York's priorities. So I have heard that New York has the following reporting goals, that ideally at the student level, you would like to be reporting overall achievement, so how a student's doing, whether that's through a proficiency level classification and a scaled score. Diagnostic achievement is also important, and that's kind of the reporting categories that you've been using, so strengths and weaknesses of various students, the students. You also use your assessment to measure student growth, which puts some added demands on the assessment in that you need to be able to measure student achievement at every point along the continuum, because you're trying to measure change no matter where the student starts. At the school level, you are ultimately, with the accountability discussions that have been going on, we've been talking about status, we've been talking about improvement, and we've been talking about growth. In terms of measurement goals for the assessment, what I've heard is that it's very important that this assessment be valued by educators and seen as a critical, important piece. As part of that, there's a very high proportion of open response items on your assessment, and that's very important to you as a state. Local development is also a piece that's important, and I believe also local scoring. So those are all aspects that New York has claimed are high priorities. So what I'm going to do, what the next sections go through is I'm talking a little bit here about some options to consider. The reality is that when you're considering assessment design, I hate to break the news to you, but you can't have it all. I'm sorry, you just can't. I wish I had the magic bullet that could make that happen, but I don't. So wants it all. Yeah.
We thought you were going to say something else.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So the next sections and the next few slides, what they go through are some kind of trade-offs that you could consider, or some things that different options. So one of the options that kind of got thrown out there was reducing or eliminating the reporting of subscores. There tends to be a pretty strong reaction against that. And in part, that's because it does have a distinct disadvantage in that educators and perhaps parents want more than just a total math score, right? They want to know some diagnostics, some strengths and weaknesses of their students. In addition, I will note here that your think tank did recommend retaining subscores. It was very important to the think tank. Some options that some other states have considered in the past are, instead of reporting student subscores, so that is reporting strengths and weaknesses at the student level, you can report them at the classroom level, or at the school level, or at the district level, of course, depending on your school size. And what that means is that in order to report subscores at that higher level, what you're doing is you're spiraling items across students, and then you're reporting up at an aggregate level. So that means that portions of the test are not the same for all of the students.
Right.
Okay. Another option is, well, these measurement folks like myself, psychometricians, come in and we say, the test has to be really long because it's got to be reliable. Okay, so we could reduce the reliability. That's another option. And in general, what we do is you reduce test reliability by making it shorter, having fewer points on the test, and you just shrink it down. Disadvantage of that, measuring growth. So the less reliable our assessments are, the less likely we're able to accurately measure change from one year to the next. Another option you could consider is thinking through the content representation. So one option is to reduce the depth and the breadth of the content coverage. So you could sample the assessment standards across years, which means that not all of the same assessment standards are assessed every year. That, I believe you're already doing some of that, but you could increase the degree to which you're doing that. The disadvantage is that not all students are measured on all standards each year. So you have to be very careful about your messaging around what's going on with that.
Yes.
Item types. You can consider reducing the number of open response items on your assessment. Again, we mentioned earlier that it's a high priority for New York to have buy-in by the educators, and the reality is that from what educators value those open response items and how students respond to them. So the other thing with the standards is that open response items, and just to clarify what I mean by open response items, are items where a student's putting in a response as opposed to making multiple selections. So it is easier to measure complex skills, which the standards are organized around, with those open response type items. So things to consider. Another option is to increase the number of items per passage, and this is specific to English language arts. So as I'm sure you're aware, oftentimes students will read a stimulus and then they answer a number of questions associated with that stimulus. So you can increase the number of items that they respond to, or a number of test questions. I'll use test questions and items interchangeably. Bad habit on my part. But you can increase the number of test questions that correspond to a passage. Naturally, a passage or stimulus will only lend itself to kind of so many questions. And so the more you try to get out of that, the harder it gets to write really good test questions. And sometimes because it gets harder, it gets a little bit more expensive. Okay, so that was kind of some content pieces to consider. Field testing. So the reality is we have to test our test questions before we can use them. Okay? Adults and educators will write test questions, and we can kind of study them ad hoc and do think aloud studies, but until we put those questions in front of a large group of students, we have no idea how those students are really genuinely going to perform on them. So that's field testing, basically, and you have to do that to sustain the high quality of your assessment program. Right now, New York does, my understanding is that New York does a combination of some embedded field testing and then some standalone field testing. Something that you could consider is going to a model that is has embedded field testing. While this would likely increase the length of the operational testing time, it would decrease the overall testing time because you wouldn't have that separate standalone administration. Okay? So the other thing that I should mention as a potential complication in that has to do with localized scoring. So we'd have to think very creatively about how we maintain that localized scoring piece if it's a fully embedded field testing model. So. Okay, matrix sampling. So this is something that some states are currently considering with science. And basically what matrix sampling is that you have a whole bunch of different test forms. And each student takes only one form, but what I take and what you would take would be different test questions, okay? So not all of your students are taking the same test questions. What it allows you to do is it allows you to get really reliable estimates at the school level. So at the school level and the district level, you get a really solid understanding of how a wide variety of content is being taught and absorbed. So it is an efficient use of testing time while generating reliable scores at that higher level. The disadvantage, you have to be able to get used to the fact that not all students are taking the same items, and it doesn't allow for student scores. So for scores at that student level and individual student scores. There are hybrids, so because some of you might be going, well, why are you bringing it up then? So because we have to report student scores. There are hybrid models where you tolerate having less reliable student scores, but more reliable school scores. So you've got a portion of the test that everybody takes that's consistent across all students, and then a portion of the test that's spiraled or matrixed. So and this is the final part that I'm going to, the final slide that I'm going to kind of whip through, and then I'm going to actually give you a task to discuss some things. So this final one is something that you might consider, which is connection to other assessments. So many states right now have, what they do is they look at their state assessment and they narrow down the purposes for their state assessment, and then they're using interim assessments or local assessments to get at and emphasize other pieces. And so you can think of a larger assessment system where all of the different pieces are kind of working together and coordinating together. And in part, this is related to something that you might consider with the pilot, right? Where you're looking at other ways of assessing students, first locally, and then growing that. Some options that folks have considered are modular assessments. So you've got targeted, localized assessments on particular areas of the content. So if you imagine mathematics, you might have a modular assessment on numbers and operations. And you might have a modular assessment on algebra and geometry. And I'm just kind of pulling those out as examples. And so what this is ultimately suggesting as an option is to shift some of the content measures from the summative assessment to the local assessment. And because with local assessments, you can get greater depth of those knowledge and those skills. So now it's time that I've whipped through that, for you to do some thinking, and I'm assuming we might want to.
Jennifer, I'm giving you the evil eye.
Okay.
And that's because we are so tight in terms of time, and we do have Scott and Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond coming on, and we have, what stands between them is lunch for both. If the audience, respectfully, if the audience wants to go out and grab something, and our staff needs to get food from across and bring it back. So if we can, if you can just take a minute and summarize, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we're looking to hear from you is what elements within. So I've whipped through a series of elements, and I know it's a lot to take in, and I know it's very complex. But as you've listened to some of the advantages and disadvantages of the different approaches, what are some of the aspects that are least important to you, and what are the aspects that are most important to you? And I've tried to kind of list them all here, and that's basically where we're landing here, is we want to get a sense of the prioritization so that we can understand what are the pieces that we need to prioritize, so then we can go away and come back with some proposed designs.
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
It may be helpful, like maybe, well, everybody now is going to get some lunch. If you want to speak with Scott so that whatever you feel needs to be reinforced or reintegrated, he can do it while we continue the conversation.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, I will ask everybody to be back in 5 minutes.
I'm sorry, I had to work through it all.
Yeah, but